How's everybody? Good. Excellent. So welcome to the Fall 2019 LS Squared lecture. I'm Dr. Carrie Kiba. I'm one of the co-founders of the series. For those who might not have been to the LS Squared series before, our lectures are designed to promote dialogue about topics relevant to the liberal arts disciplines. Our series is a forum for the exchange and dissemination of ideas, a place to celebrate faculty projects and research, and a way to reach out and share our work with both the NSCC family and the broader community of which this college is part. If you're interested in being considered to be a speaker for future lectures, keep on the lookout for an upcoming CFP that'll be coming out soon. And if you're interested in viewing any previous lectures, they are all available for free on our Google Sites page. So if anybody's interested, send me an email. It's sites.google.com, northshore.edu, ls2. But again, you can email me that and I can send that link out to you. Now I'd like to turn the lectern over to my colleague and LS Squared co-founder, Dr. Kara Kaufman, who will introduce us to today's speakers.
Hello, thank you. I want to introduce today's speakers. There are two of them. Dien is an associate professor of philosophy and healthcare ethics at MCPHS University in Boston. He is also the director of the Center for Health Humanities. In addition to researching in the area of healthcare ethics and philosophy of medicine, Dr. Ho is an avid cyclist and an aficionado of all things zombies. And Bonnie Ashmore is a full-time faculty member at our Fine Arts Visual Studies program. She is a member of Gallery 263 in Cambridge, Mass., and has shown her work in many group and solo shows in New England, New York, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Florida, and Nova Scotia, Canada. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ho. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hey everyone, thank you so much for the tremendously kind invitation. And for those of you who don't know, Professor Ashmore and I were actually college roommates at one point. So we go way, way back. And I don't know why we have not done any joint presentation before, but I'm so glad we have a chance to do this. This is I feel like a college kid right now. So this is awesome. I'm so happy to do this. So what I want to talk about today, before we do that, let me just say you a quick thing about MCPHS University, because no one knows what it is, even in Boston. MCPHS University used to be called Massachusetts College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, and before then, we were just called Massachusetts College of Pharmacy. And we are, technically speaking, the oldest college and university in Boston. Harvard does predate us, but Harvard is in Cambridge, and we are in Boston. So we beat them out by technicality. And if you ever go down there, we are in the middle of the Longwood Medical Area, right across the street from Mass Art, and also right across the street from Harvard Medical School. All that land that Harvard Medical School sits on used to belong to us. And we sold it to them in the late 19th century, and we are still regretting that decision until today for many reasons. But so just to give you a sense of what we do, we also train mostly pre-professional healthcare students. We train pharmacists, nurses, PAs, acupuncture, alternative medicine, dental hygienists. We also have a robust pre-med program. And I am really glad to say that starting fall 2020, we're going to have the first ever undergraduate degree in New England on health humanities. And health humanities allow you to pursue a whole range of amazing careers, from being science writer, journalist, policymaker, to going for a graduate degree in public health, in PhD in the humanities. And we also have two pathways to medical school. So it's actually a great MD options too if you're interested in becoming a doctor. So talk to me, email me if you want to know more about this stuff. My email address is right there. All right, so this is what we're doing today. So why did I write this book? And this is the book that I wrote. It's called A Philosopher Goes to the Doctor. And I started this project about 2 years ago, but the bulk of it was actually written last summer. And this book came out this summer. Before I get into these little points here, I have to say that one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I find it just absolutely incredible that I'm an immigrant. I came from Hong Kong. And I was also an absolutely horrendous student. I was on the verge of being kicked out of school almost every year from first grade up to eighth grade. And even in college and high school, I was pretty unmotivated and generally speaking, bored out of my mind. So the idea that I would write a book in English and someone would actually pay money for it absolutely blows my mind. So I find that to be intrinsically rewarding, just to be able to tell all of my high school and grade school teachers that I actually became a professor. I know a few of them are just appalled by the state of American education, where someone like me could educate young people. Nevertheless, it brings me great joy to sock it to them. But the real reason why I wrote this book has a lot to do with the fact that in addition to being an academic, I also work in hospitals. I provide clinical ethics consultation in hospitals. I've done that in Boston Children's Hospital. I also, before coming to Boston, was a professor at University of Kentucky, and I started their hospital ethics committee at University of Kentucky. And we provide clinical consultation for patients or staff who have ethical issues that they want to resolve. And in my experience working in hospital, I realized a couple of things, that both research medicine, so this is like scientific medicine, doing clinical work, doing clinical trials, and also clinical medicine, providing healthcare in clinics, in hospitals, both areas of medicine make a number of important philosophical assumptions. And in the process of hearing them talk about what they do every day and grand rounds and so on, I realized that they were not only just doing philosophy, they were doing really bad philosophy. So my sense is that medicine could be better if we actually clean out the crap that sits below medicine, that's essentially the foundation of medicine, philosophical foundations, that if we actually tighten that stuff up, we can make for better medicine. And that was the reason why I wanted to write this book. I wrote this book primarily for the general public. It's not written for philosophers. And my hope is that clinicians and patients would read it and understand some of the critical philosophical assumptions that we make in medicine, and we can have better medicine as a result of that. So what role does humanities play in medicine? So here's the obvious stuff. This stuff, I think, for anyone who is in medicine is nothing shocking. Narrative medicine is probably the hottest thing right now in pre-med and even med school. And the idea is that when patients and clinicians read patient stories, sometimes they're called patients' narratives, about their own experience battling different diseases, it transforms care providers into more empathetic clinicians. It increases the level of compassion. And clinical data for this are very robust. We have really good evidence that this stuff actually increases quality of care. And this is also true for patients too. Reading patient narrative helps patients understand that their condition is not unique. You feel less alone, and it also generates better therapeutic outcome. So that part of it, I think, is indisputable, to the point where lots of hospitals, especially the bigger hospitals, have programs in narrative medicine just to make sure that that kind of training is included. If you know anything about the med school application process, you know that med schools and the application process nowadays have a much larger component of the humanities built into it. MD students need to learn something about narrative medicine. In addition, art therapy, music therapy are clearly justified in clinical setting. They are essentially using creative activities to bring about therapeutic purposes. I know someone from Sweden who works in a psychiatric mental health facility, and they have an open studio in there where patients can just come in and do things creatively, paint, draw, or do sculptures, or nothing. And a number of patients said, this is the only time in the day that I don't have to do anything. And it is the one part that they most look forward to, and it plays a tremendous role in their healing process. So again, art and music therapy, I think those are no-brainer. And of course, from the point of view of political philosophy, questions like what kind of rights do you have when it comes to healthcare? How should we distribute things like organ transplantation? Who should get them? Should people who are in prison on death row receive organ transplantation? Should alcoholics have lower priorities for liver transplantation because they drink themselves to cirrhosis? Those are all legitimate questions, and those are all questions within humanities. So I think the role that humanities play, it's pretty obvious in terms of these respects. But there's also the lame stuff. The lame stuff is the stuff that I think administrators like to talk about. Why do you want to have a degree in humanities, especially because everybody and their cousin are talking about STEM these days, and science is taking over universities, we're putting more money in it. But if you actually look at what's happening in terms of students who graduated with a humanities degree, you realize that humanities majors are some of the hottest commodities right now in the marketplace. Google is hiring philosophers left and right. I'm not making this stuff up. If you're an undergraduate and you're a philosophy major and you know how to do some basic coding, you will have a job. And one of the reasons is philosophers, although we worry about these big, giant, abstract questions, in reality, philosophy is really about universal problem solving. Can you solve a problem with just the information you're given? And that's what I'm trained to do, and lots of private sectors are looking into hiring people who have that more general ability. And of course, there are things like philosophy majors have the highest percentile chance of getting into medical school. This blew my mind. The national average, I think, is about 36% of applicants actually get into medical school. Philosophy majors have a 50% chance of getting into medical school. Now, to be sure, if you're a philosophy major and you're also pre-med, something else is going on too. You are super ambitious. So this could be a self-selective group of people. But compared to biology, chemistry, and biochemistry, classic pre-med majors, philosophy majors beat them out by quite a bit. And then there's more lame stuff. Humanities major, believe it or not, have the third highest combined scores among all majors for MCATs, which is the medical college admission test, right behind math and physical sciences, which again blew my mind. Humanities majors systematically outperform biology major, traditional pre-med majors, and in the area of verbal reasoning, humanities major have the higher scores within MCAT. And I want to show you a quick chart. So if you look at the GRE breakdown of the verbal reasoning, you can see that verbal reasoning on the very tip top is philosophy majors. And it really brings me... Number four. I'm so glad you asked. Number 4 is actually art history and criticism ahead of political science. That's incredible. That means art majors do a better job understanding, writing, expressing their thoughts, and arguing than political science majors. So take that. But second is English. And they're behind philosophy by quite a bit. And English majors, that's what they do. They do verbal reasoning. And I like to point that out because my ex-wife has a PhD in English, and I am a PhD in philosophy. And in fact, on my GRE score, when we applied to graduate school, I score higher in the GRE score in the verbal than my ex-wife did in the GRE. And she was an English major, and I'm an immigrant, and she ain't. So it's a lot of that where I think like, yeah, the thing about your major is it kind of sucks. So that's me. But anyway, so I think these are all like practical reasons why you want to consider a humanities major. Those are not really compelling. I think they're kind of fun, but not really that deep. So here are the reasons that I really think you should think about doing a major in philosophy and the humanities. The reason I do philosophy is super fun. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't so fun. And this is the kind of stuff that I remember in graduate school. After classes, my friends and I will go out to dinner, and then we'll be hanging out in somebody's apartment, drinking, and talking philosophy until the sun comes up. And those were some of the most amazing experiences in my life. those moments where you are collectively getting together, not arguing for arguing's sake. You're arguing because you want to know the truth. You want to find out what you should believe. That kind of experience was invaluable to me. But we do also do philosophy all the time. I get this all the time because I teach at a mostly science school. I have students who have never taken a humanities class come and take my philosophy class, and they struggle in the beginning of the semester. They really struggle in the exams. And they say to me, I've never taken a class like this before, where you're forced to think, which kind of blows my mind, because what the hell have you been doing in college if you weren't thinking? But they also say things like, science is so concrete. It's about experiment. Philosophy is so broad. You're thinking about justice. You're thinking about God. You're thinking about what is the nature of knowledge. Well, the thing is this. I asked her, I was like, yeah, that's all true, but is science really that concrete? I mean, after all, when's the last time you saw an electron? And she said, yeah, I never seen an electron. I was like, that's right, because you can't see them. They're unobservable. But when's the last time you asked yourself, what should I do with my life? Or is it okay to lie to my friends so they can avoid going to the party on Friday? Those questions are 24/7. So you're already doing philosophy, but you ain't doing quantum mechanics on a day-to-day basis. So why not do it more rigorously? In fact, for me, there's no more compelling question you can ask yourself on a daily basis than, how should I live my life? And that question is a philosophical question. That's an incredibly relevant question. So I think philosophy is really relevant. And where does philosophy show up in medicine? And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. The obvious place it shows up is, of course, bioethics. Ethics show up in medicine all the time, both in terms of how we decide in clinical situation what to do, but also in hospital policies. I'll give you an example. When I was in the hospital committee in Kentucky, I had a patient who did not want to donate his organs after he died to anyone who was not white. And the care team came to see us. They said, what do we do? Do we take his organs and have this ridiculous criteria attached to it and allow someone to receive an organ and possibly save his or her life? Or do we turn it down because it's bigoted? That's an ethical question. And how you come down can affect someone's life. It's no joke. To me, healthcare ethics is probably the most relevant and important part of philosophy. So if you do philosophy, you should be in healthcare ethics. I had not always been in healthcare ethics. My training was in philosophy of science. But when I realized the gravity of healthcare ethics, I was sold. I dove right in. So right now, my research is in both tracks, both in ethics and also in philosophy of science. But what I want to talk about today as an example of how philosophy can play a role in medicine is to look at the distinction between science and pseudoscience. So let me just give you a quick picture of what science is, what pseudoscience is. Science are the disciplines that you're all familiar with: chemistry, biology, physics, maybe like computer science is a science, maybe psychology, sociology, maybe political science, probably not. In fact, at Brandeis, where we went to school, the department is not called political science. It's just called politics, because there was a debate about whether or not politics constitute a science. And they couldn't settle on that debate, so they simply called themselves politics rather than political science. So those are considered, kind of clear-cut science. What about pseudoscience? Pseudoscience are things that look kind of like science, but not science. That's the traditional picture. So like what? I'll give you some example. Reflexology is probably considered pseudoscience. Reflexology is looking at the bottom of your feet and seeing different zones. And there's some theory about the different zones and how they affect everything from physiological element to your psychological conditions. So if you have trouble with your bowel, you have to press this part of your foot. And you can get special soles built for your shoes that will stimulate the correct part of your bottom of your feet. Reflexology is a business. But it looks like science got lots of charts and graphs. I think they have their own journal, and you can get accreditation for it. But typically, it's thought of as a non-science, as a pseudoscience. More controversial cases might be things like chiropractic. Is chiropractic a science? That's a great question. But the more important question is, does it really matter whether it's science or not? So in the opening chapter of my book, I asked a very simple question. Can bad science make for good medicine? Does it really matter that it's not science? And on that note, what is science? If modern medicine is based on science, then something that is non-scientific is automatically not in medicine. And that has a great deal of practical implication. You're not going to get fundings. You're not going to get your treatment delivered in a hospital. You're not going to get your stuff published. And try as you might, universities are not going to teach you classes because they don't think of yourself as a real science. So lots of things are at stake in terms of the decision of whether or not something is science. So what is science? Really basic question. The fun part is I'm in the School of Arts and Sciences. I travel among lots of scientists, and I can say without any hesitation, not a single one of them knows what science is. They don't know what science is because nobody knows what science is. It's not a question of them being sloppy or ignorant. Nobody knows. But the most compelling example or definition of what science is really came from a guy named Sir Karl Popper. He's been knighted, so he's officially Sir Karl. And that's a picture of Sir Karl right there. I really like that picture of him kind of like losing his mind. That's awesome. So Karl Popper was a well-known early to mid-20th century philosopher, and he came up with a basic definition of what science is. He said that a discipline is scientific if it makes predictions that are falsifiable. By falsifiable, he doesn't mean that it's false, but rather it can make predictions that can be shown to be false. So what does that mean? His favorite punching bag is Freudian psychoanalysis. And he actually wrote about it in his famous lecture on falsifiability. The three things that he went after was Freudian psychoanalysis, Marx's theory of history, and Adler's individual psychology. So if you know anything about birth orders, like, oh, the second child is always the one who gets screwed and all that stuff, that's from Adler. That's Adler's individual psychology. And Freud, of course, need no introduction. It's still part of our everyday vocabulary. So what Popper pointed out was this. If you talk to people who are advocates of psychoanalysis, they oftentimes report tremendous success in their clinical practices, tremendous success and effectiveness of psychoanalysis. So for example, suppose I go see my psychoanalyst, and I say, hey, I'm having a real hard time forming meaningful personal relationship with any woman. I'm emotionally blank. My psychoanalyst might say, hey, tell me a little bit about your relationship with your parents. And in discussing it, maybe my psychoanalyst would diagnose me as suffering from a severe case of Oedipus complex, that I was struggling to come to terms with the anxiety of wanting to kill my father and marry my mother. And that is the source of a great deal of my anxiety. So suppose my therapist proposed that as a possible explanation for my neuroses. And I say, let me think about that. I don't dismiss it out of hand. I go home and I think, have I ever wanted to kill my dad and marry my mom? Am I sexually attracted to my mother and feel threatened by the presence of my father? And I think to myself, not really. I think my mom is really unattractive. And I like my dad. My dad is a good guy. And I don't really care that he's sleeping with my mom every night. Good for them. What the hell do I care? Suppose I thought that, and I come back a couple of weeks later and I say, hey, Mr. Therapist, I thought about what you said, but I don't think I'm suffering from Oedipus complex. Now, that's a way for my therapist to take that information and actually conclude that he did not make an incorrect diagnosis. In fact, it's built into psychoanalysis. He can just say, patient Dien is not just suffering from Oedipus complex, he's also in severe denial. Done. So it looks like there was no way for you to actually falsify what Oedipus complex, the therapeutic diagnosis. It looks like you can never lose. Another example that I like, although Popper doesn't talk about it, is, of course, astrology. So this was the horoscope that I saw yesterday. I'm a Gemini, so it's going to be Gemini for the win. November 5th, 2019. So here's my horoscope yesterday. In the past few days, you may have felt somewhat frustrated in your initiatives, either outside obstacles, such as events that cause delays, or inner restraints, such as your apathy, presented a clear challenge. Before you can make any real progress, certain matters must be resolved. The day ahead may give you an opportunity to finally settle these issues. Was that true about yesterday? Absolutely. How could it not be true? It says that yesterday I had some obstacles that got in the way of things. Some of these obstacles are outside of my head. Some of them are inside my head. That's everything. So it's either, every obstacle is either outside or inside my head. So it basically said that you have some obstacle that prevent you from getting everything done. True. Before you make any real progress, certain matters must be resolved. Obviously true. How can you make any progress without resolving any issues? They don't magically show up. And the day ahead, and this is even hatching your bet some more, may give you an opportunity to finally settle these issues. So suppose no opportunities arise in the next few days. So what? It said may give you. So this is so vague that it looks like no matter what happens, this is a prediction that's going to be confirmed, no matter what. And Popper noticed that pseudoscience have a way to insulate themselves from false predictions. No matter what happens in the world, they're going to come out having a true prediction. While real science, on the other hand, take risky guesses, and they make predictions that can be shown to be false. And that's the basis of Popper's view. This view was widely accepted, and I don't think it was implausible at the time. And the reason I wrote this book was because I went to a talk at Harvard, and the speaker was a well-known biologist. And he literally said, before he started, he said, "My work is not falsifiable, though therefore I do not consider myself a scientist." And it blew my mind. I thought, dude, if anybody is a scientist in this room, it's you. Not this guy who fixes feet. That guy, that podiatrist, he's not a scientist. What, are you kidding me? He's more like a butcher. You are like a scientist. No disrespect to butchers in the house. But so I really do think that this kind of falsifiability is deeply ingrained. In fact, I did like a very brief search on PubMed. There are tons of articles that pops up that uses falsifiability as a way to distinguish science from pseudoscience. So more critically, you can think about something like this. So think about remote intercessory prayers. It's a complicated name of praying for someone without their knowledge and seeing if these prayers can actually improve their clinical outcomes. So there are studies done where they assign two groups of patients. One group get prayed for unbeknownst to them, the other group did not. And then they want to check for therapeutic outcomes. So these people are not in the same room when they are being prayed for. They are remote. And intercessory means they pray to God to intercede and make this person better. That's the prayer. So my first thought is, no way. No, not a chance. This is at best noise if you get anything statistically important. And lo and behold, there are a couple of studies. In one study, in a randomized double-blind clinical trials, patients that has advanced AIDS were prayed for by people they did not know and were not aware of their being prayed for. Complication as a result of AIDS was significantly fewer among those who were prayed for. Likewise, in another study in 1999, the outcome of patients that were admitted in the coronary unit, half of them were prayed for, the other half were not. The one who were prayed for had fewer complications as a result of their hospital stays. Now, what are you going to make of this? The first one, you're like, West Journal of Medicine. What the hell is that? I don't even know. Is that a leaflet somebody put together? But the second one is JAMA. It's Journal of American Medical Association for the Internal Medicine Journal. That's legit. How do we make sense of this? Should you be allowed to teach this in your physiology and anatomy class, in your pathology class? That, oh, if you want to lower the complications of heart diseases, do some praying. Would you fund this study? It seems crazy. Now, all these pseudosciences have too many outs. That's their general characteristics. There's too many ways for them to insulate themselves from objections. But this is also true for all conspiracy theories. So I'm sure you're all aware of some of the more famous conspiracy theories that are flying around, including the flat earth conspiracy theory. Yeah, some of the more prominent professional basketball players have expressed their sympathy to flat earth theory. And the thing about conspiracy theory is that they are also insulated from any criticism. If you point out, there was a guy in, I think, Nevada who was a flat earth person, and he wanted to find out for himself where the earth was in fact flat. So he crowdsourced money to do a homemade rocket that can shoot up into the sky for about, I think, like 1,000 feet, and he was going to take a look to see if the horizon is curved. There were two questions. One is, how do you plan on getting back down? That's the obvious one. And he hasn't really thought about it. He said he will figure it out before he lands. The second one was, why don't you just take a plane? Why don't you just get on JetBlue and fly to Reno or something? That's not that hard. The problem with that move is, if you tell him, get on a plane, look outside to see if it's curved, he's going to tell you, dude, they're in on the conspiracy. Don't you understand? That data is no good. They are in on the trick. This is what they want you to think. So conspiracy theories are also immune to any external criticism. And that's part of the problem with conspiracy theories in general. And according to Popper, they would be pseudoscience. Popper falsifiability took the reign and became the dominant theory for many, many years. For, I would say, at least 30 years in mainstream philosophy, and I would say continue to be the standard in contemporary science. But the cracks were starting to show, even shortly after Popper had started proposing falsifiability. So one of the most obvious problems is that falsifiability appears to be both too loose and too tight as a criteria to distinguish science from pseudoscience. So in terms of too loose, it's too easy to turn any apparent pseudoscience into genuine science. Remember, falsifiability just means that the discipline makes some claims that can be shown to be false. If any discipline makes that claim, and it is shown to be false, it might be bad science, but it's no longer pseudoscience. Newtonian mechanics makes false prediction all the time when it comes to enormously large objects. General relativity will take care of that. Or quantum mechanics, tiny little things. So we know Newtonian mechanics is false. Mass is not conserved. But we do not think that Newtonian mechanics is not science. It might be false science, but it's definitely science. So it's very easy to turn any pseudoscience into science just by tacking on one claims that can be shown to be false. So check my magic trick out. It's my party trick. I'm available for birthday party, bar mitzvah, and bat mitzvah if you want this stuff. So go back to our horoscope here. And for the resident astrologers who are offended by my claim that you are engaging in pseudoscience, watch me turn astrology into a science with one click. Here it is. I'll make one prediction at the end, and you will run into your cousin Louise, who is going to buy you lunch. It might turn out to be false, but that would make astrology a science, because that claim is now falsifiable. Look at how easy that was. Creationism, science. Reflexology, science. Chiropractic, science. No longer an issue there. It's also too tight. There are too many disciplines in the sciences that are not falsifiable. Theoretical physics, where you don't make any claim that you can actually test. For example, whether the most fundamental parts of the universe are vibrating strings or a tiny little packet of energy, we probably will never be able to find out. And there's no way for you to actually run an experiment to find that out. But yet, MIT has a robust department in theoretical physics within their scientific discipline. Formal computation theory, if you're doing linguistic, computer science, you're just doing simple manipulation. You're not saying anything about how this stuff corresponds to the world. That makes your claim not falsifiable. And of course, just good old empirical data gathering. If you're interested in measuring the temperature of the ocean, you're not making any claims about falsifiability, but you're definitely doing science. So none of these are falsifiable, but yet we intuitively think they're sciences. So Popper's view is probably too tight and too loose. What came crashing down really came from Thomas Kuhn's book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. I think BBC called it one of the 100 most important books ever written in the Western tradition. It is a brilliant book on philosophy of science. The worst part was Thomas Kuhn wasn't even a philosopher. He was a physicist and a historian, and he wrote a book that revolutionized philosophy of science. So someone from the outside show us all that we're idiots. And what Kuhn did was he argues that whether something is science or not does not base on any logic of the discipline. Like, is it falsifiable? Instead, something is science if it behaves like science. If it acts like a duck, then it's a duck. So what does it mean to behave like science? For Kuhn, a discipline is scientific if it has a set of core principles that everybody believe it. Like, for example, in modern physics, it would be something like interactions are physical, or that objects in the universe are made of the same kind of fundamental material. Those are the core principles, and then you have more peripheral principle. And then it also tells us things like what questions are legitimate research problems. So if you were to say, I want to unify quantum mechanics with general relativity and come up with a uniform theory of the universe, your dissertation advisor will tell you to go home and work on something else because it's just impossible, too broad, and no one is interested in it. It also tells you what qualifies as an answer. So in medical research, we have some standards. Peer review, you got to have a p-value, false positive rate of less than 0.05, 5%. You have to cite other pre-reviewed articles. Those are all criteria for telling us what is a successful solution. Finally, science, what makes something a science is that science tells you a set of classical experiments and who are the practitioners you're supposed to emulate. So if you are a science major, you know this. When you're taking chemistry, biology, whatever class you take, you're forced to do labs. You're actually not doing anything new. They're not asking you, find out the exact value of 1 mole. You're not doing that. They're asking you to replicate experiments that people have done 200 years ago. They're doing that to train you to emulate well-known scientists. And if you have that in your discipline, if you have key characters, key experiments that you can imitate, then it also adds to this sense that you are doing science. Now, for those kids who are still paying attention, here's something to keep in mind. This looks a lot like a religious tradition. You have your core canonical beliefs. You have beliefs about what are the right and wrong questions to ask about your faith. And you have exemplars. Be like Jesus. Be like St. John. Be like Paul. These are all factors or characteristics that also exist in religion. So if you pay attention, it looks a lot like the line between science and religion is way blurrier than what we started out thinking. This part at the bottom, this concept of acting like science, there's a name for that, and a name that you all know. This is called a paradigm. So when the next time you hear someone use the phrase paradigm shift, especially if they're a tech bro and like, we need to disrupt the paradigm, we need a paradigm shift, they are stealing the phrase from Thomas Kuhn. That's where he got it, all right? So what about astrology? Is astrology a science according to Tom Kuhn? Well, according to Kuhn, there is nothing intrinsic about astrology that disqualifies it from being science. If astrology has a paradigm along those lines that we just discussed, then it's a science. So this person, who is apparently a really well-known astrologist in South America, it's now a great scientist. So, what have we learned? We learned this. Falsifiability cannot distinguish science from pseudoscience. And any medical intervention that is being labeled as pseudoscientific, like, for example, prayers, using falsifiability, it's probably being labeled incorrectly. We reject prayers mostly because we think that we don't have a physicalistic understanding of how prayers work. And that the idea is that how could my thoughts to God affect, in the distance, someone else's physiological condition, because our paradigm says changes must be physical. However, if quantum mechanics taught us anything, is that non-physical effects do exist. But more importantly, if you can tell a story about how prayers can make you feel better that is consistent with our understanding of science, then prayers are in the game. So in order to know whether prayer is scientific or not, one way you can do is this. Can you tell me a story about how prayers can physically affect another human being? If you can do that, then we're going to include it in our, at least as a plausible treatment. Humanities matter. It matters because of partly what we've done today. You can see the following. Knowing what the nature of science is can make real changes about both clinical practice and research medicine. Doing this is a kind of philosophical house cleaning. We get rid of the goofy foundations that people are relying on. And it also tells us what are acceptable and unacceptable mode of treatment. But I think there's a cooler part. The cooler part is this. If what I'm saying is correct, what makes something a candidate for science is the fact that you can link it within our scientific paradigm, then we're really talking about telling stories. So when we talk about narrative medicine, we typically talk about how, like, if you read how someone else gone through the same thing, you feel less alone, or doctors become more empathetic. Absolutely. That part of narrative medicine is indisputable. But there's a new part, a part that I think a lot of people miss, which is when we're discussing whether a particular therapy can be fit into our paradigm, we are telling stories. And who are really good at telling stories? People who tell stories for a living. People who are trained in writing. People who are trained in writing stories. Why not ask them, what is it about this picture of a treatment that seems plausible? What kind of stories are we linking? So in that respect, humanities make a huge difference, not just in terms of patient outcome, but in terms of the very nature of science and medicine. I want to end just by telling you a little bit about the cover of the book that I published. There's an important personal story that I'm going to leave it up to Professor Ashmore to mention. I'm just going to say a little bit about what this is. So this is the cover of the book. It's a painting by Professor Ashmore. It's actually a painting of a molecular structure of a chemo agent called cytosine. Cytosine is derived from mustard seeds. And it was discovered as a treatment for cancer completely accidentally. And here's the story. The story was 2 scientists from Yale, right before World War II, wanted to find an antidote to mustard gas. So for those who don't know mustard gas was deployed in World War I widely. And unlike chlorine and other gas that were deployed, mustard gas does not just affect your lung. So if you put a breathing apparatus on your face, it won't block the effect of mustard gas, because mustard gas, when it gets to your hand and makes your skin in general blister. So these 2 scientists from Yale wanted to find an antidote to mustard gas before World War II started. And they went back and looked at medical records of GIs who survived World War I, and were exposed to mustard gas. And they found something absolutely remarkable. Those individuals have lower rates of leukemia. They also have lower concentration of white blood cells. So they discovered that there was something in the mustard that's actually killing these fast-growing cells. And with that in mind, they decided to test the hypothesis that the same substance could actually fight cancer. And lo and behold, it's true. And this became the basis of Cytoxan, a chemo agent that we still use today. And it came from a weapon of mass destruction, taking a very weird route to oncology wing of your local hospital. And for me, that really says a lot about the nature of medicine. Oftentimes, medicine does not progress in this linear, rational, clear-cut, evidence-driven way, but rather lots of accidents, lots of social conditions, lots of cultural issues come into play, and that stuff, who is better at helping you understand it than a bunch of people in the humanities? Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Dien. We should give him another round of applause. So I'm Bonnie Ashmore, and I teach art and art history here at North Shore. And thank you all for being here. And this was also really exciting for me to do a lecture with you, Dien. So what I'm going to talk about, I will talk about the painting that's on the cover of the book, but before that I want to talk about how that painting is part of a series that I did beginning in 2013, which is called Origins. So here's the, hopefully this works. Oh. I'm going to do it like that. Okay, old school. All right, so this is the one that's on the cover of the book, and I'm going to come back to this one because I want to go chronologically through the series, and this was not the first painting from the series, although it's important, and I'm glad that Dien selected it. This is actually related to the first painting in the series. So what I did was I did a series of work based on chemotherapy agents. And you may be wondering why I did a series of work based on chemotherapy agents, but it's because I had cancer. And I had a long course of treatment, which included many different chemotherapy drugs. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to learn more about the agents because, well, I'd spent a long time with them. We had spent a lot of time together. And I knew like relatively little about them. So I decided to do a research project based on some visual information because artists receive information visually, right? And we observe things and we learn about things by looking. And so I started first by looking at the molecular structures of the drugs, beginning with Taxol, which is a common chemotherapy drug, not just used for breast cancer, but for many cancers. And I started drawing. So not all artists, of course, receive information and learn about things through drawing, but many of them do. And for me, it was a process that made sense. So I started drawing the molecular structures and trying to learn about the form of these substances. In addition to that, I also wanted to know about the kind of like the human element behind these drugs because for those of you who maybe you've been a patient before, but being a patient can be like a little bit of a dehumanizing experience because your identity is like kind of stripped from you, hopefully just temporarily. But you know, you're like wearing a gown, you're wearing like a bracelet that has your name on it, like you're separated from your usual routine. And I wanted to find some way to have like a human connection because I knew that there was obviously someone who discovered these drugs, a person was attached to that process. So I started looking into the origins of the drugs, and as I found, which is true about many pharmaceuticals, the origins are in nature. So for this particular drug, Taxol, the origin of this drug is actually from the bark of the Pacific yew tree. So I started to think about that and kind of thinking about like my own connections to trees and how, you know, a scientist obviously harvested a piece of this bark and they realized that there were properties in the bark that could kill cancer cells. So I started to think about the origin of the drug being this object from nature and also the molecular structure. And I combined them to create, this was the first painting in the series. So you can see that the molecular structure is kind of there as part of the subject, but also, and it might be a little hard to see on this big screen, but there are, it's clear that you can see the wood grain because I painted on wood. So it was important to me to see the wood grain because, of course, that was part of the origin of the drug. Initially, I really thought that I would just be making these drawings of the molecular structure and that those would be kind of like the foundation or the armature of a painting or a series of work, and that in the end, the image would kind of be sort of hidden. Because that's the process of abstract painting, at least for me, is I usually start with some kind of a initial image and then I kind of it transforms. But what I found was that the molecular structure really became the image. It became the subject of the work. I also did a series of prints based on this is also Taxol. And so I do printmaking, and prints are made on paper, which of course also comes from a tree. And I liked the idea of how the ink, when the ink is in contact with the wet paper, how it kind of breaks up and dissolves. And so I thought about that too, because obviously these agents are active, right? They're not static. They're doing something in your body and interacting, and they're active. So that led me to create other prints where I was trying to show or experiment with how the ink reacts to the paper. Here's another one from that series. And by the way, the title of this is Taxus brevifolia, which is the name of the tree. That's the Latin name of that tree, the Pacific yew tree. Here's another one. And you can see that the wood grain is very important part of this image as well. This is another painting. I'm going to come back to this painting. But this painting is also using Taxol, and I was also, when I got to this painting, which came a little bit later in the series, I was really thinking about that active piece that I was talking about and how the molecules are moving around kind of in this, like almost like a aquatic landscape, of your body internally. So the second drug that I researched was adriamycin. Adriamycin is like the original name for it. There's other generations of this drug now. But adriamycin, when I was learning the origin of this drug, it almost seemed you're going to think I was making it up. It doesn't even seem real, okay? It's real. So what happened was there was this castle in the south of Italy. Here it is, the Castle del Monte. And it's this crazy castle. It's shaped like an octagon. It has all of these eyes, incised on the side of it has a big oculus. It's open to the sky. It's very, mystical. It's very, looks like it's a scene from some, medieval, Game of Thrones kind of, scenario. And outside of the castle, there is red soil. So, different minerals are in are in the soil and can affect the color of the soil. So some scientists collected some samples of the soil, and it was found that the soil contained components that were almost like a very, very potent antibiotic that could kill cancer cells. So what happened? Oh, here's another picture of that window with the eye and the open to the sky. I made a painting here. It's called Il Diavolo Rosso, which is an Italian word. The reason why I made it in Italian is because the drug was discovered in Italy. And by the way, the drug's name, adriamycin, it's named that because it was found near the Adriatic Sea. I'm going to go back to this one because I just wanted to point out that this is actually a fresco that's on the wall of a building in that same region. And do you see that red color that's on the dresses of those ladies so frescoes are made from pigment, which is found from local sources that's, put on a wet wall, right? And it's fused together. So I think it's really interesting that the material that makes this paint, I'm a painter, could actually be the soil that they use to make that drug, right? So that makes you think like this whole other level of how like art could be healing, like not only a healing modality, but even like physically, like the materials of the paint. So here's the painting that I made based on Adriamycin. And then I made a series of prints also. The prints that I'm showing you here are all mono prints. So mono prints are mono meaning one, right? Like they're individual prints. But what I do is I use a matrix, so they all have the same structure. And I print it over and over again on the same plate. So some of the ink is held over in future, like some of the ink from the first one might be in the second one and so on. So they are unique prints, but they're related to each other, which is different than a monotype. A monotype is like truly unique. People always ask me the difference between monotype and monoprint, so there you go. I also wrote a poem, believe it or not, that was published in the Dartmouth Medical School Journal, and it was on the red devil. Oh, Diavolo Rosso in Italian means red devil. That's kind of the street name for the drug. The reason for that is because it's red in color, but also because it has cardiac toxicity. So here's Cytoxin. I call it Cytoxin, but you pronounced it something, I don't know. Okay, I'm not a scientist, okay? But this is the drug, okay? That was the basis for the cover of Dien's book. As Dien explained, Cytoxin is closely related to mustard gas, like, structurally. And I knew that story that he told you about how it was initially created as like, a destructive force. It was made to kill people. And then they found out that it could actually heal people. And I thought that that was like really profound. And I made this painting. Obviously, the palette that I used is based on these mustard colors because of the origins with the mustard gas. The title of this painting refers to a poem by a British poet, Wilfred Owen, and he wrote a poem about the devastating effects of mustard gas in World War I, and this is part of the title of his poem. And I made some prints based on Cytoxin as well, more monoprints. Then I thought about combining some of the drugs together, because when you're given like your course, for me, I was given Adriamycin and Cytoxin on the same day. And so I thought about what if I made some paintings where I was combining the two together, because they are working together, right? To hopefully, do their job. And so here we have Adriamycin. You can see it's like the red part in the center, and then that gold other shape around is the Cytoxin. And then I will often use like repeated imagery because you have like multiple infusions, so that kind of seemed to make sense to me. And this is another one of Adriamycin and Cytoxin's like combined efforts. For me, it was helpful to think about what these substances were doing that was positive, that was like healing. So I felt like, in the imagery that I'm generating, I wanted to kind of show my interpretation of something that was being healed, or through the process of being healed. So the last drug that I investigated is this drug, which is commonly called Herceptin. Herceptin is different than your typical chemotherapy drug. Your typical chemotherapy drug will just like randomly kill all fast-growing cells, which is why people have things like hair loss or digestive issues. Anything that's like a fast-growing system in your body is going to be affected by that. But with Herceptin, it's smarter. So this is my I'm not a scientist way of explaining Herceptin, by the way. It attaches itself to, it knows what it's looking for, it attaches itself, and then those elements are not able to reproduce, okay? So I understood in my way, that concept, and I wanted to show that in the work. These are titled, the series of the ones based on Herceptin are titled Good Aim, because I wanted to kind of think about how it was smarter, it like knew what it was going after, and was going to get it. And then I did a lot of monoprints based on this because I had a lot of Herceptin. It was like every 3 weeks for a year. So I had to make a lot of prints. And then this is another one with the Herceptin molecules, but I combine them together in one piece. So here's something cool that came of this series. I got to show this body of work at Mass General Cancer Center where I was treated. And it was really a great experience for me because I had spent like so much time there, and it's like a very time consuming. You're there like all day, you're waiting, and I always appreciated it when I had something nice to look at on the walls. And so it was really, I wanted to be able to have something to show people who were in my shoes, not that long before. And one of the cool things that happened is at the opening, a doctor came up to me and he said, I bring my students up here and I quiz them on what those drugs are. So I didn't even know it had an educational component. So that made me the teacher in me was happy about that. And then another thing is that the PBD-Essex Museum in Salem approached me and asked if they could make one of my paintings into a piece of wearable art in conjunction with an exhibit that they were having, which was traveling there from New Zealand. So these are some clips from the show. So it's like this big fashion show that happens in New Zealand every year, but the fashion is wearable art. So basically any artist can, contribute to the show, if they get in, but it has to be something that can be worn by a person. So you can Google it if you're interested. It's pretty cool. And they're very theatrical. They're kind of like a fashion show meets Cirque du Soleil, if you can imagine that. So they actually selected that painting Flux, which I showed before, which has the Taxol in it. And they turned it into the scarf that you see there that I'm also wearing. And this was at the opening. That's my daughter. And they had a wall in the exhibit where they talked about our collaboration and a little bit about me and my body of work, the origins. And they also made a little video that I would like to share with you. And this video was shot in my studio. So you can see a little bit of the paintings in the context of the size that they actually are, not on a giant screen on the wall like this. I chose to work on 29 paintings because I had 29 separate infusions. The molecular structure of the agents, I wanted to kind of care for them and make them beautiful. In doing so, it actually became a very healing experience for me. It would be a lot easier to make an ugly cancer painting. The one that is being used for the scarf is based on Taxol. I wore scarves when I lost my hair. I know some people sort of feel like they never want to see those scarves again. I wanted to take them back and reclaim them. I chose to wear those scarves, continue wearing the scarves, but this time around my neck. And I hope this would be that type of scarf that can remind you of the empowerment that you received from going through that. That is the end.
Any questions for Bonnie or Dien?
Hi, Bonnie. I was very impressed with that series. Did you create it while you were undergoing treatment or afterward?
No, I couldn't really do anything during treatment, but I was thinking about it. I started making it about a year after I finished my active treatment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if other people able to buy like the scarves and support?
Well, they sold out. Yeah, I should have mentioned that they were sold at the PBS Museum, and for every scarf that was sold, they actually donated one to a patient at Mass General. And then Mass General also did the initiative there, and they sold them at the hospital and also donated one. But just this summer, the last one sold at Mass General. So, yeah. But maybe I should make some more. I don't know. Aw.
Is there still an exhibit at the Peabody Essex Museum?
There is not. Although, yeah, sure. The exhibit at the PBS Museum is no longer up, but the WOW exhibit, the World of Wearable Art, is something that is traveling, like it just travels around internationally. So I'm sure if you're interested in seeing some of the WOW creations, you could go and find their website and see, where they are in the US. I remember when the year that it came here, it was just coming to Salem and then somewhere on the West Coast, like Seattle or Oregon, I forgot. So, thank you.
Thank you.
There was a question by a student who was sitting behind me, and I guess he had to go, wondering where can we find your book? To
my
get
book.
it?
You can find my book at number of fine places. You can find it on Amazon. You can find directly from Routledge. And amazingly, you can find it at Target. I have no idea where they're stuck. Yeah, it's on the Target website. I have no idea. You can get your Tupperware and my book in one place. But if you're interested in buying it, shoot me an email. I'll sell you my copies at a discount. Because you shouldn't have to pay more than you need to. So when I sell them to you, I can even sign them if you want to. It will decrease the value of the book, unfortunately. But if you would like to, I can, just send me an email. I'll get you a copy of it. I think they're retailing on Amazon for like 30 something, but if you buy from me, it's like 27. I'm basically selling you at cost. I don't make any money from it.
Could you actually put your email up on the screen?
Sure.
So we could
Of course.
email you?
Easy breezy. No problem. How about Dwayne? It's very creative. It's just Dien Ho. Dien.ho@mcphs.edu. So you can always just email me there. I got a couple of copies if you want to just Venmo me or whatever. That's cool. So, yeah, whatever you like.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.